All right, and we're live. So I'm Mike Lucchine. This is Ray Mencio. We're NFL Rough Draft. Okay, quick introduction on who we are. We were here last week at some point, and Walt is really kind. He lets us do these shows a little bit earlier than he comes on. I know he doesn't have a show on Monday night, so he won't be on tonight. So we might go a little bit longer than an hour tonight. But I was on his show a lot last year over the summer. We did some best ball drafts together, and then I had the fantasy football draft preview over the month of August. And Ray and I have been doing our website, our NFL draft website, for almost 20 years at this point. NFL Rough Draft, the Huddle Report rankings for top 100 boards. So I don't know if you listen to Todd McShay, he talks about it all the time. Okay, so like he brags about how, his board is the best and all that. And, he's pretty good. We like Todd. He knows what he's talking about. But as you can see, just pop this up here. If I can figure out how to pop this up here.
There's an ad for like women's lingerie up there now.
Oh, that's for some reason every time I'm on our site, there's Victoria's Secret ads. But all right. Well, on my other screen, I am on the Huddle Report's 5-year rankings, and we won the Huddle Report big board 3 times. Okay, you can see here we won it in 2015, 2018, and 2022. Okay, and we also held the 5-year average. That's the one that he's always bragging about that. And you know what? He deserves credit because right now, Todd McShay is the king of the hill. In 2025, he holds the 5-year average for the best board. It is the first year he's held that. We held it in 2019. We maintained it in 2020. And then in 2022, our name isn't there because we were tied with Bob McGinn. And Robbie, the guy who runs the Huddle Report, said, well, at that point, Bob McGinn had more like overall titles or something like that, some kind of tiebreaker. So instead of putting both of our names there, Bob McGinn's name is there. But there are 3 years that we've won the Huddle Report, and there are 3 years that we have been in first place for the 5-year average. So the top 100 board is our thing. We're hoping to sort of get another title this year. Our board's due next Tuesday. Later this week or early next week, we'll probably do another show where we talk about our top 100. At that point, maybe I'll try to figure out how to switch tabs on this screen share. But for now, you can see that we have a brand new mock draft. And this is 4 rounds. We're going to go through this tonight. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, drop on in and, Ray and I will answer them. But Ray, first of all, great to see. Last time, for the viewers who were here last time, you were inside my chimney during the episode. Now I see that you've got a Friday Night Lights thing going on here. Yet there's a game. It's a nice autumn evening right now.
Yep.
As we're doing this live. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. We're 10 days away from what is, our top holiday of the year. So this year felt like it came up on us quick for whatever reason, but I'm excited. This is my favorite time of year, so can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like you and I were ahead of where we normally are back in August and September and October. And I feel like we were a little bit behind though, coming into February and March, but we're ready to go now. We got this 4-round mock draft. Ray, do you want to set this mock draft up a little bit before we dive in?
Yeah. So, the approach here is a little bit different than normal. It's not necessarily, predicting 32 first-round picks is challenging. Predicting 4 rounds is impossible. But what you kind of want to do here is just giving everybody has options when they're picking, and this is really an idea of not sometimes looking at other ways that they could be going. It's not definite that way, but do you want to? Can we get into it? And I'll explain what I mean a little bit. Is that good with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we do that, I want to give a shout out to Walt and of course Charlie Campbell. Okay, Charlie's a great mock drafter. Walt is too. I mean, Walt. I don't know if people realize, like, there are very few people who do this, who go back as long as we have, where like you could go and look at their websites and see them getting into the weeds and on 7th round picks and undrafted free agents like we do.
Yeah.
And Walt has always done that. And even before, I would joke around with him that Walter Football was the first website on the internet. But Walt and Charlie, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot of mock draft. Our bread and butter is our top 100. Like I mentioned, I'm not a lot of fun. Ray's more fun than me, so I obsess over our top 100. Don't really care about mock drafts. But yeah, Ray, let's get into it. Fernando Mendoza won to the Raiders.
Can I give one more? I want to give one more shout out to Walt and Charlie. They do on their website. They have a comprehensive list of visits for who teams have met with, and that information a lot of times is hard to track down. So sometimes it's nice to have it. It's something I go to verify if a guy's went and visited a team. Now, again, we don't necessarily know everyone who's going to do that, but they do a great job on the website of that's a link I'm always looking at to see what type of player teams are looking at, what position, what day they're looking at players. So, that's a great resource too. If you have a fan of a team, go to their website, check out the visits, see who's there, someone who worked out, if they met with them at the combine and whatnot. So it's a great tab there.
Yeah, and I mean, as impressive as that is, and somebody actually just commented here, Walter Football has been my go-to site for many years. So you kind of stole what I was going to say there. What Ray's talking about with the visit tracker and the different types of meetings that the teams have had with the different prospects, as impressive as that is now in the year 2026, that was a resource back in 2007. Okay, that's been a resource for a very long time. So yeah, it was even harder to track that information down back then. All right. So yeah, Walt and Charlie, they do a great job. Ray, is there anything you want to say about Fernando Mendoza to the Raiders, or we just gonna skip over
the only thing that I want to say about Fernando Mendoza, and I think I said it last time too, is that you had said to me back in the summer, Fernando Mendoza's transfer from Cal to Indiana. We should pay attention to this guy. And I watched more Indiana football than I ever thought I was going to watch. He is clear-cut number one quarterback. He is clear-cut the number one player in this draft. He deserves to go number one. He's going to be a good starter. Glad the Raiders aren't overthinking it.
Yeah, it's funny. We had a Devy fantasy football league. Ray and I co-manage a lot of dynasty fantasy football leagues. And Devy is where you draft players who are still in college. And we took Fernando Mendoza in April, maybe early May of last year. And we got him late too. It's just because he was like the number 20 overall prospect in the transfer portal. People talk about how he came out of nowhere this year, but he didn't really. I mean, he had a good year at Cal and he was going to work with Curt Cignetti. I mean, that's not nothing. Everybody knew Indiana was going to have a talented team. Maybe we didn't expect it to be quite as good as it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Mendoza won, David Bailey 2, which it sounds like that's the way they're going to go at this point.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because this is really where the draft starts. I've heard, it depends on who you listen to and who has resources. And this time of year is always famous for people putting out not things that aren't true just to throw people off the course on other teams. But this is an interesting one because you can make an honest case for Reese and Bailey here. It's going to be one of those two. I mean, I do think the Jets would, if they got some really good deal to move down, they'd love to get another first-round pick in 27 if they could do that. But both of these guys, are really good pass rushers. And the problem is you got the ceiling of Reese, which is Micah Parsons. That's what he can be. And then you have David Bailey, who's probably the safer pick with a little bit lower ceiling, where he's a double-digit sack guy. But, I mean, he's got almost – and that's the thing. He has almost better traits than Arvell Reese as it is. He's got longer arms. Their 40s were really close. He's got bigger hand size. He's got a bigger, wingspan. He's a little bit thicker. So, David Bailey and Arvell Reese is going to be an interesting one to see who goes to. It's going to be one of those two guys. I like them both.
Yeah, it's sure trending toward it being Bailey. That's what everybody seems to be thinking at this point. I mean, it does make sense. There's less of a projection. And, you could definitely make the argument that when you're picking number 2 overall, you don't really want to be making a projection on player position.
The one thing that's interesting there is Aaron Glenn talked a lot about Arvell Reese and compared him to Danielle Hunter, guys who are really athletic that didn't necessarily put up eye-popping numbers in college. So, is Aaron Glenn talking about him to, again, throw people off the scent, or is Aaron Glenn talking about him because he wants him to be the cornerstone of his defense? So, but right now that's where we kind of went with Bailey as the pick. And, that'll be something I'll be paying close attention to over the next week.
Yeah, it looks like after they traded Jermaine Johnson to the Titans, right, they got Sweat. Right after that trade went down, you knew it was going to be either Bailey or Reese.
Yep.
So, all right, 3, Cardinals, Jeremiah Love. Well, let's talk about this. So do you want to start with your thinking, and then can I have a chance to respond to it?
I don't know. It depends. Here's the truth of the matter. I think the Cardinals are going to do everything in their power to trade down. They need offensive line help. I don't think Francis Maniolo is the pick here. I think Spencer Fano could be the pick too. But again, there's the question mark of some people think he's a guard. I think the Cardinals are going to do everything they can to trade down. I think that they might even take a deal that's not as good as it normally would be for them to trade down. But my thinking here, again, goes back to what I kind of said, and it also coincides with a couple of their picks later on in this draft, is that I think there is a little bit of pressure to be competitive right now, just from the management perspective. I don't think that it's, necessarily the smartest play, but Jeremiah Love could be the, offensive rookie of the year and have 1,600 yards from scrimmage and be a focal point of an offense. But, we've seen Ashton Jeanty and Bijan Robinson go pretty early in drafts, and their teams not have the success doesn't necessarily translate to wins and losses. But that's the pick that I made now. I'm going to be honest and say that for my final mock draft, most likely it's not going to be Jeremiah Love. Okay,
you saved yourself from getting yelled at. Thank you for that explanation. First, Brandon, that's pretty funny. At pick 28, he says he wants the Victoria's Secret models on the ads. Every time I go to our website, these Victoria's Secret ads pop up.
Brandon got to steal the draft right there.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, good pick, Brandon. In terms of Love, you're right. They should be looking to trade down here. So you look at the running backs they have, right? They've got Trey Benson. He's not going to impact your pick at number 3 overall. You've got James Conner. I know he's getting older. If it were just James Conner there, then I would say, okay, maybe you take a shot at Jeremiah Love, even though it's a little bit early for a running back. But with Algier there, I feel like they probably knew they were going to have a chance to draft Jeremiah Love with the 3rd pick in the draft during free agency. You sign Tyler Algier. You've got James Conner. You've already got 2 running backs. I just don't. I don't see them. I don't see them drafting Love. I think you're right. I think they're going to trade down, they could take Arvell Reese. So
yeah, I don't think that Connor or Algier, and I'm one of the biggest James Conner fans, but he is dwindling towards the end, and Tyler Algier is a good backup. That's what he is. I don't think they really prevent you from drafting Jeremiah Love. But I also don't think with the Cardinals have a lot of needs, and I don't think running back is number one.
But Ray, again, I'm gonna just throw roster construction at you. Okay, let's make believe we were in charge of the Arizona Cardinals in March. Okay, right before the first day of the league year, or I guess the first day of the legal tampering. Even though obviously teams come to deals with players even before that, but roster construction. You've got James Conner. You bring him back. Now you go get another running back who isn't going to play special teams. He's a pure running back in Tyler Algier. You've got 2 running backs now. And it's one thing if you're picking 10th and you're thinking, well, Jeremiah Love might not fall to us, right? Then I could kind of see it. But if you're picking 3rd overall, Jeremiah Love's, well, he's not going 1. He's almost certainly not going 2. I don't think somebody's trading up to 2 overall to take a running back. So I just feel like they would have considered that and not signed Tyler Algier. I get what you're saying, where, he's not as special of a running back as Jeremiah Love, but I think he can be a starter, and James Conner's still there. You look at the way that roster is going to be constructed. There are your 2 running backs. Your other running backs on that team are probably going to be guys who are going to contribute on special teams.
James Conner's only signed to this year. Algier signed for 2 years. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think you know what I'm saying, though, right? Like you're throwing running back usually a special teams guy.
Yeah, no, I don't. You're not totally wrong.
I'm not wrong at all. No, but I agree. They'll probably try to trade down.
You're just a little wrong because neither of those guys are anywhere close to Jeremiah Love.
I agree. All I'm saying is we can agree, right, that the plan is probably not to make James Conner or Tyler Algier a game day inactive every week, right?
I wouldn't be shocked if James Conner wasn't an Arizona Cardinal week 1.
Okay. That would make it a little bit.
He's 31 years old. It's just this year left. He's a good soldier, but it's a very good chance he's not there.
I still think they're taking Reese or trading down for offensive line help.
No, absolutely. That's probably what I'll end up doing in my final mock draft.
And Brandon, you're killing it tonight. You get in the time machine and take Will Anderson at 3. That would have been a good decision. They probably should have done that.
Yeah, back then I was pounding the table saying Will Anderson was the best player in that draft. I was a big Will Anderson fan, and good for the Texans doing what they did. But Brandon's right; they should get in the time machine.
Yeah, well, I think everybody was a big Will Anderson fan back then, and even more so now. All right, let's keep this going. So we're not here till 4 a.m. All right. So you've got Reese going 4 to the Titans. That seems like great value right there. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a value pick. I think Jeremiah Love, that's another potential landing spot for him. They're in a really good spot. They could also take Carnell Tate. So they're going to have their choice of a couple players there. I don't think they trade down because I think they want to get impact players. Bailey, Reese, Love, Tate, all impact players, all good choices. That's where the Titans are at.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick if the board fell this way. I think there's a decent chance Reese will be gone at 3 to someone, whether it's the Cardinals or another team. And this is the first spot where I could see Jeremiah Love come off the board. I just think, I know you've got a defensive head coach that just took over there in Saleh, but you've got to help Cam Ward have more success than he had last year. I know that they drafted some decent, day 3 type pieces last year, and Chimere Dike and Alec Ayamanor, but and actually Gunnar Helm too, right? Gunnar Helm's there, but they need to help Cam Ward out with some more pieces here. So that's where I think if Jeremiah Love's still there, you have to draft him. There are some people who think it could be a receiver. That makes a little bit of sense, but that's too high for me for any of these wide receivers. I think, in a trade down scenario, fine. But then, you're probably trading that pick to somebody who wants to come up and take Jeremiah Love, I guess.
And again, they are doing their due diligence with those 4 guys amongst others. So, you could, again, going back, you could take a look at, Walter Football taking the prospect visit tab, and you could see that they brought all those guys in.
Yep. And Jason, I'm with you. I think Reese probably goes at 3. And Brandon, he said that Chris Sims had Will Anderson as his 5th best edge rusher in that class. If you're looking for really good draft rankings, okay, there are a lot of places you could go. Okay, I'm not going to be Todd McShay and say our board is the best, even though we won the Huddle Report 3 times, just like he did. And we actually had the 5-year average for 3 years, not just 1 year. Okay, I won't say that. There are lots of places you could go to get an accurate board. Okay, you can go to Walter Football, but don't go to Chris Sims. Never go to Chris Sims. All right. Yes. So 5, Sonny Styles. I'm going to start with this one. I understand it. It makes sense. You've got the John Harbaugh factor, right? He likes to build up the defense. But I just think Sonny Styles is getting a little bit overrated. He had a great combine. I get that. I think we're blowing it a little bit out of proportion, though. First of all, it's an off-the-ball linebacker in the year 2026. Number 5 overall is awfully high for that. If you were going to take an Ohio State player right here, I would actually take Caleb Downs. I know he's not as good of an athlete as Sonny Styles, but who's been the better player on that defense? And it's not, it's not a deal where like Caleb Downs is 5'10" or something like that. He's just not a freakish athlete like Sonny Styles. But for me, give me the better player all day long here in Caleb Downs, although Styles does make sense.
This goes back to the roster construction piece, is that, they don't have, their safeties aren't bad. Tyler Nubin and Javon Holland are good starting safeties. So could they take Caleb Downs here? Absolutely. Could they take Sonny Styles here? Absolutely. Could they take Jeremiah Love? Yeah. I think John Harbaugh knows that Cam Scatabo is, running himself through too many walls at this point. But they're in a tough spot too, because, you look at the positions that they probably need the most. They could use an interior offensive lineman. I don't think this is a little too early for that. They need another defensive lineman, an interior defensive lineman, especially if they're going to end up trading Dexter Lawrence. But there's no one worthy of that pick here. So the other position they could look at is wide receiver and give Jackson Dart, another weapon besides Malik Neighbors, and Carnell Tate, is a pretty good complement there. And I'm going to give you one that is a little bit crazy of a pick. It's not going to happen, so don't hold me. I don't think it's going to happen. I give it like a 3% chance of happening. I really don't think it is. But if we're looking for a year that we're going to have crazy picks, if the Giants took Kenyon Sadiq and modeled what the Ravens did on offense and having Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, I could see them doing something like that. And again, it's probably more in a trade back scenario, but it would just give them a different look and a different way to compete in the NFC East.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea of Kenyon Sadiq. I just don't like it at 5 just because of the amount of money you're going to be paying him on his rookie deal, right? Because this is, like I said, I'm not that much fun. So one of the things I like to obsess about, and I know Ray does this as well, is the value you're getting cap-wise from all these picks. So if you're taking a tight end, and it's another reason that Jason, was talking in the comments about running backs and they don't have long careers, and he's right. Well, another reason for that, or another reason for not picking a running back early in the draft, is the amount of money they make. You're not really getting a value if you're taking a running back or a tight end, 3rd, 4th, 5th overall. Okay, same actually with an off-the-ball linebacker, because those positions historically are not really paid that well. So, what you would like to do if the value lines up is take an edge rusher or an offensive tackle, obviously a quarterback, a wide receiver. So if they traded down and took Sadiq, I wouldn't mind that. I actually think you're onto something there.
I don't like taking tight ends that early because they basically have to be a Hall of Famer to live up to that billing. We saw what happened with Kyle Pitts. He had a great first year, but the pick right after Kyle Pitts was Jamar Chase. And 2 picks after that was Penei Sewell. So, and again, the pick after Chase was Waddle. So, Kyle Pitts is a good tight end, but he's a major disappointment, especially when you compare him to those guys.
I still can't believe they took Kyle Pitts over Jamar Chase. My final mock draft that I submitted that year, I was like, no, I know everybody's saying that they're taking Kyle Pitts. It's a smokescreen. I'm giving them Jamar Chase, and I was wrong.
But you were right. Wrong on the pick, but that would have been the right choice.
I still can't believe they took a tight end over Jamar Chase. And that's not hindsight either. And Brandon's got some other good examples here too. All right, so some good options there for the Giants. I understand Styles. It does make sense. I just, again, don't like taking an off-the-ball linebacker that high, especially when he's a good player. I'm not convinced that he's going to be the best linebacker in the league or even a top 5 linebacker in the league. He's just got really good workout numbers. And Carnell Tate going 6th to the Browns, so that's got to be a wide receiver or a tackle there. By all accounts, it sounds like Carnell Tate's going to be the first receiver off the board. So I think that makes plenty of sense. Did you consider anybody else there?
It would just be either Mino or Fano there, realistically, for them. They need to rebuild that offensive line, but they also need wide receivers. And, Tate ends up being the pick there. That's what I could see happening for sure.
All right, let's skip past here since we're 27 minutes in and on pick 6. So you've got Washington taking Jermod McCoy. So McCoy over Delane.
Yeah, that's, again, this is what I was saying earlier about trying to predict surprises is challenging. McCoy is a better cornerback. That's what I'm going with. Delane is very good. McCoy is better. McCoy would probably be a top 3 or 4 pick in this draft had he not torn his ACL. But he tears his ACL, comes back at his works out at his pro day, works out well. You drinking your matcha tea there? Good.
Yes.
A little bit of caffeine, so trying to stay up for the night.
Yeah.
So, when we're looking at this and saying, what are the Commanders going to do here? Who are they going to go with? There's a lot of different ways it can do, but every team needs a shutdown cornerback. And I think Jerrod McCoy, for me, is the number 1 cornerback in the draft, not by much, by a hair. But again, little bit of a not a chalk pick by any means, and that's what I was going for.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I personally have Delane a hair ahead of McCoy, and that's mostly just because McCoy didn't play this year. You're right about everything you said about showing up at the pro day. He ran sub 4.4. He's got longer arms than Delane. There's a lot to like there. One interesting trend, though, that we've seen for the last couple of years is that cornerbacks have been falling. And I'm really interested to see if that's going to continue again this year. And I'll give you specific examples. So Will Johnson, though, the people who were kind of in the know, nobody was surprised that he fell. I'm pretty sure we had him in the 2nd round of our final mocks last year. But Jahdae Barron, if you can remember back a year ago, everybody was projecting Jahdae Barron to go top 10. And now he's a little bit more of sort of like can he play outside? He's more of a sub-package guy. But he fell all the way to the Broncos that I want to say 20. I think they were picking 20 last year, around 20. What's that?
No, you're right, 20.
20, yep. And then before that, too, the year before that, so you had Quinyon Mitchell, right? You had Terrion Arnold, and then even Cooper DeJean, who, some people said corner, some people said safety, but they all kind of fell. And we've been seeing corners get pushed down the board. I'm interested to see if this trend's going to continue. I think one of the reasons for it is because there's just so much volatility at the position. Like you could have a corner who has a really good year, and then they're just not as good the next year. And they, there are very few examples. Like Pat Surtain, one of the guys Brandon was talking about in the chat earlier. He's good on a consistent basis. But you see a lot of these guys have good years and then they kind of fall off and they're kind of bounce around all over the map. And so I don't know. It's just something I'll have my eye on this year. Although I want to say I still expect Delane and McCoy to get picked certainly in the top 15. All right. And so you've got Delane going 8 to the Saints. That makes sense. 9 Sadiq to the Chiefs. That's one that's kind of been a popular pick. It makes a lot of sense. Kelsey's back. Kelsey obviously doesn't have that long, and tight ends take a while to develop, right? So you're not getting peak Kenyon Sadiq year one, right? You'll be able to kind of ease him in, and then assuming Travis Kelsey retires after this year or the Chiefs just decide to move on, Sadiq takes over in that role, and that position is obviously a big part of that offense, so that would make sense. And then you've got Caleb Downs going 10. Defense to the Bengals makes sense. Do you want to talk about any of those 3 picks?
I love Downs too. I think he's going to slip a little bit in this draft. I mean, when I say slip, I mean I think that he's probably the second or Mendoza, Love, and Downs are my 3 favorite players in this draft in terms of what you get. Downs is going to slip a little bit just because he's not the 6'4" Kyle Hamilton, and he's not running a 4.3 and has these freakish athletic traits, but he is the smartest, most instinctive player in this draft. And I think at 10, he's a steal. But I do think he slides a little bit, or someone trades up to get him. But I'm a big Caleb Downs fan.
Yeah, well, and remember Kyle Hamilton, what did he run? 4.65, something like that?
Yeah, he was slow. Yeah.
Might have even been slower than that. But, we can see that even though he's bigger than Downs, he's had a very good start to his NFL career.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I think Downs is going to be a heck of a pick, even though he doesn't have, he's not the workout warrior. All right. Maui Noah going all the way down here at 11. Was this a medical thing here, Ray, or what do you think?
I think it was just there's going to be a run that all these tackles are going to go, and it's going to start at some point. And I think it's whoever is going to jump the gun first in terms of saying, let me get one of these offensive linemen. Maui Noah is, I think, a very good offensive lineman, but he's not Joe Alt. He's not even Rashawn Slater. So, I'm struggling a little bit with where Maui Noah goes because I'm not even convinced that he's the best tackle in this draft.
Are you even convinced that he's a tackle?
No, we're not even convinced that he's a tackle. And if you're going to count him as a guard, I don't know that he's the best guard in the draft either. So this is a value pick, in my opinion, for the Dolphins, who have a hole at every single position, essentially, that you say, let's get this offensive lineman that is a safe pick. Maybe the upside's not all there. Maybe he's not an all-pro, but we know we're getting a really good, safe player that's going to help us for the next, hopefully 4 or 5 years. But I don't know. Where are you on Maui Noah?
No, I completely agree. The whole time you were talking, I was thinking, well, we're not even really 100% sure he's going to end up playing tackle long-term in the NFL. But I think this pick makes a lot of sense, only because the other obvious position would be wide receiver for them. Mm-hmm. And if you need a tackle, you can't pass at 11 because you're not going to have a tackle there on day 2.
Right.
And there'll be plenty of wide receivers there on day 2. But you're not going to get a tackle. I mean,
that was my other
or late day 2.
My other thinking is that they have the Broncos' first-round pick, so there's going to be their choice of receiver there. All the tackles are very well could be gone by the time they make that selection.
Yeah, and that's right, because that's much later first round.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to have a tackle that's available there. So I said day 2, but I mean even late first round, I
Right.
think these top tackles are going to be gone.
Yeah.
That's right in the range where you should have some pretty decent value with, some of the, whoever you're slotting as the 4, 5, 6 receivers.
Yeah.
Whether it be Omar Cooper, Concepcion, Denzel Boston. And then certainly later in the draft on day 2, there are all kinds of receiving options. There are probably about 20 receivers who I could see going on between day 1 and day 2 of the draft, top 100. And when you look at tackles, there are no second round tackles. And really, if you're looking at third round tackles, I'd make the argument that there are no tackles in the first half of the third round. It's first round, probably top 25 or so. And then after that, you're taking shots on guys late in the third round. And if you're going to take one of them earlier than that, you're reaching.
Yeah, I agree.
So Manoa makes sense. You've got Ruben Bain going to the Cowboys at 12. I said I think I could see him going 20. Last week when we did this, I think the short arms are a bigger issue. Drafting an outlier in the top 10 makes me a little bit nervous. I think that's how some of these GMs get fired. I guess the Cowboys don't have to worry about that.
Braden Fiacco's that's what he's been saying too. He said Ruben Bain's going to get it. But the other thing is the unfortunate news that somebody, for those of you who have or haven't seen it, there was an incident involving a motor vehicle incident that Ruben Bain was driving and ended up taking the life of a young woman. That's been known, and the teams have known that, but now it's just come more to light because somebody wants basically clickbait. So the teams know it and they're investigating it, and to see, now that it's out in front, there's a little more media scrutiny potentially with his pick on top of the arms. So there's another reason, that could push him down a little bit farther down the draft board. But Jerry Jones doesn't care about stuff like that. Jerry Jones wants a flash in the pan. And if Jerry Jones thinks that he's going to get 15 sacks, Jerry Jones will take him.
Yeah, especially on the defensive line. There have been so many guys over the years where you and I have said, all right, this guy's a really talented edge rusher, but he might fall out of the top 100 just because he's got some issues. And then they become Cowboys. It's like one after another. But Ruben Bain, I brought up the short arms. I know you brought up the situation that he's got going on that teams have known about. It sounds like that's not going to be too much of an issue for him. I think I read that even the victim's family said something like, this was a terrible tragedy. We wish Ruben Bain all the best. So it sounds like it was a legitimate accident.
Yeah.
But I just think, you're drafting, if you're drafting an outlier in the top 10 overall picks of the draft, you better be certain. Now this is 12. It's a little bit more palatable. And also the Jones family runs this team, so they don't really have to worry about keeping their jobs. So Fano, again, he's another one where is he a tackle or is he a guard? And we talk about the arms things, and you brought up Braden Fiacco, and it's crazy how many fans are out there yelling at him, telling him he doesn't know what he's talking about. The guy played in the league. He was a lineman. He was a defensive lineman in the league, and people don't think he knows anything about what the NFL is looking for at defensive and offensive line.
Played at LSU. That man knows more about football than 99% of the people telling him he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a good dude too. I like that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So Fano makes sense there for the Rams.
There's one thing I want to, the one thing I want to clarify about that pick. The Rams have a pretty good offensive line, and last year Warren McClendon was very good at right tackle, but the problem is that Warren McClendon is going to be a free agent at the end of this year. And if he plays like he did last year, he's going to be due for a significant raise. And you can't pay all 5 of your guys on your offensive line big money. So Fano getting in here, you could put him at right tackle, you could put him at guard. I love this pick, not for necessarily an immediate impact, but you figure out where he goes. At some point he could plug in at 4 different positions this next year, and he could be a full-time starter going after that. You don't have to miss a beat. So that was my thinking with that. I've heard they like Makai Lemon, but the Rams also operate very close to the vest. So,
Ray, I'm actually really glad you brought that point up. I think this is why the Calgary Stampeders let you do these podcasts from the press box of their stadium. No, but that is a really important point that you brought up. Everybody looks at the team needs, and a lot of times that ends up being, oh, okay, well, what does this team need right now to win right now? Now, the Rams certainly are trying to win right now this year, but you also have to factor in players who have expiring contracts, okay, meaning a year from now, sometimes even 2 years from now, once you get later into the draft.
Yeah, left tackle Alaric Jackson will be a free agent in 2 years. So,
right. So, I mean, this is a need for the Rams, even if it's not a glaring need right now in 2026. And you're going to dilute your roster if you pass on better players to take, immediate needs. Because then next year, well, what would happen? Well, you need an offensive lineman, and maybe you're not in a position to get one as good as Fano. So good point. All right, you've got Ioane going 14. I've been calling him Ione, and it's because the Raiders used to have this guy, Junior Ione. Yeah. We're probably going back like 30 years at this point, but it was spelled the exact same way.
Yeah.
Junior Ioane, but this is Vega Ioane, apparently. And he is arguably the best offensive lineman in the draft. So that's a slam dunk right there for the Ravens. Keldrick Faulk to the Bucks. That's your tradesy, sort of young, up-and-coming edge who you can pop inside if it's depending on who drafts him. Okay, if he's in a 4-3, he can pop inside to play defensive tackle, 3 technique on passing downs. So I like that pick. You've got Makai Lemon going 16 to the Jets. I think that makes sense. And then Caden Proctor, very popular pick to the Lions at 17. Do you want to talk about any of those picks?
No, I just think, the Jets have shown a lot of interest in that next tier receivers. They like Omar Cooper. I just don't think Cooper goes necessarily above Lemon, but he could. You never know. But, Proctor seems like a really good fit with the Lions as a right tackle, and he seems like he seems like he fits with that team. They've shown a lot of interest in him. That is one I might put in pen going forward.
Well, it seems like a lot of people have put 18 Vikings and Dylan Thieneman in pen as well. That's become a very, very popular pick. These Harrison Smith comparisons have been all over the place. So, that makes sense there. Caden McDonald, 19, to the Panthers. So that's a little bit early in my mind. And I would say the same thing for Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, 20 to the Cowboys. Do you want to talk us through 19 and 20 here a little bit, Ray?
Yeah. I don't remember whose mock draft it was, but I saw someone's mock draft saying, like, this is probably the earliest you're going to see Caden McDonald go. So challenge accepted. I am an incredibly big Caden McDonald fan. I think that he is, again, one of the more underrated players in this draft. The reason he's getting knocked down is because he doesn't have, quote unquote, much pass rush skills. Well, he had 3 sacks last year. Ohio State has a lot of good defensive linemen. They rotate him very, very frequently. He wasn't, it's not like he was on the field for, 100% of snaps. I think that he has the ability to be, he's not Aaron Donald, don't get me wrong, but for him to get 5 or 6 sacks a season while being an elite run defender, I think you're getting a very good player. And this is something I could be very wrong with, but I think that he's one of those guys that is a lot more well liked by coaches than he is necessarily by the media. He's 21 years old. He's a plays like a man amongst boys, yet he's one of the youngest players in the draft. So I just think that he's got a huge upside that people are discounting. He's not a 25-year-old Akeem Mesidor. He's 21 years old. He throws people around. I just like him a lot. I think he deserves to go in this range. This is a little bit earlier than anyone else is having. I just don't think that anyone should be surprised if he does go this high.
Okay. Well, I'll let you have that for now. I'm gonna talk about the Cowboys at 20. Yeah, that's right. I think it's a little bit early for Caden McDonald. I like him a lot more 10 picks later, but the Cowboys.
I hope the Raiders
take Warren. I can only yell at you about so much, Ray. So I actually think if Thieneman were there, he makes sense. I don't think Emmanuel McNeil-Warren makes sense. And I think for me, the reason there is if you're taking an off-the-ball defensive player for the Cowboys, I think they really need someone who's going to be sort of like the green dot, the guy who's going to get the defense lined up. And I don't, from what I've gathered, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is not going to be that guy. I've heard Thieneman is. So if I'm going to go off the board and sort of fill a similar role where Dallas is getting some more defensive help and they're getting their off the ball defensive coach in the huddle, how about Jacob Rodriguez here?
I'm a big Jacob Rodriguez fan, but that guy missed a lot of tackles. He missed a lot of tackles. I like him. I can't take him this early because I don't know that he's actually going to, if he misses half his tackles in college, how many is he going to miss in the NFL? He's a magnet for the ball. He's a playmaker, but he's got a ways to go. I think he's got to put it all together before we could do that.
I mean, I think that'd be a little bit early for him too. And in fairness, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is a turnover machine as well. But they both forced a lot of fumbles. But I just think that if they're going to take an off-the-ball defensive player here, I really think it's got to be somebody who's going to kind of act as the captain of the defense, and at least be able to get them lined up. And I don't, from what I understand, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is not that guy. I think if Thieneman is here, that's a slam dunk pick for them. I think anybody else would be in that role would be a little bit of a reach at 20. All right, the Steelers, Omar Cooper. All right, Ray, you know what? You and I were talking about this guy against Illinois. And we said, why is this guy not a first-round prospect? Why isn't anybody talking about him as a first-round prospect? Well, here we are.
I've liked Cooper all year long, in what he's done. If I were the Raiders, I would do everything I can to pair him back up with Mendoza. But the key here is that Jordan Tyson's still on the board. So the factor for me when doing this was strictly Jordan Tyson is potentially the most physically dominant receiver in this draft, but the injury history is going to play a factor for a lot of teams. And Omar Cooper is going to be almost the polar opposite guy where he's going to work. He's not going to miss a ton of time. He's going to work hard. He could play inside. He could play outside. He's versatile. He checks a lot of boxes for a lot of teams. So with the Steelers, I think he's that guy that you're going to stick, between the hashes, and he's going to make plays, and he's going to be a safe, reliable target. I love Jordan Tyson, but I could see him going at the end of the first round, and I could also see him going in the top 10. But I think Cooper, some teams are going to look at Cooper as a safer pick.
Okay, that's fair. I'd take Tyson as much as I like Omar Cooper, but the durability is definitely a concern. All right, Messidor to the Chargers. Now, last week you mentioned Messidor as someone who you thought was a little bit overrated. Again, we talked about taking older prospects, and we said on day 2 and certainly day 3, that's fine. If you're drafting a player, you're getting them for 4 years on his rookie contract on day 2 or 3, and if you get 3 years of a starter, you are thrilled with that. It doesn't matter that the player's 29 at the end of his career because, or not the end of his career, sorry, at the end of his contract, because whatever, his rookie contract's over. So that's fine. But you brought up the point that in the first round, you'd be a little bit more hesitant because the ceiling's a little bit lower. And, you want your first round pick to be an impact starter and maybe somebody who you're going to be signing to a second contract for sure. So tell us why you gave them Messidor.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love this spot for Messidor either because I think he's got to go. I do want him to go lower almost. And I don't personally want him to go lower in terms of my predictions. I would like to see him go a little bit lower. But
you hate him, is what you're saying.
No, I don't hate him. I think that the problem here is that the position the Chargers need is an interior offensive lineman, and they could take one of these offensive tackles with hopes that they slide them inside. Iwanu is going to be long gone. In my opinion, by then, if they want to trade up to get him, that's where I think their biggest need is. But on the defensive side, Khalil Mack is not young, so they need another edge rusher. And that team is wants to win right now. And then some of these edge rushers, even a Keldrick Falk, it's going to take a little bit of time. That they're works in progress. Whereas Messidor should be the finished product. This is now a new spot though that I think we could see Ruben Bain go. I wouldn't be surprised if he fell here to the Chargers at 22. Maybe that's the spot for him going forward.
So after you yelled at me last week about saying that I think Ruben Bain should go about 20, now you're saying that he should.
I didn't yell at you about that because I agreed with you. You're just trying to pick a fight about something.
All right.
We'll argue. This next pick you could write in pen.
I agree with you, but listen, I'm taking TJ Parker over Akeem Messidor. I want a second contract out of my first round pick.
I am too. I don't disagree with you. I have him rated higher. It's just Parker and Woods were incredibly disappointing this past year. And I don't like that. I don't like when guys have these huge years, these eye-popping years to be best edge rusher in the class to totally, I shouldn't say totally getting shut up, but he was incredibly disappointing. So that's what scares me a little bit about Parker. But I again, in my final mock draft for everyone out there, don't be surprised if Parker's ahead of Messidor. But don't be surprised if Parker's ahead of Ruben Bain at this point either.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. He's been ahead in our rankings slightly. We've had them in like the same spot pretty much, like right next to each other in that cluster. But you're right about 23. Look, if Monroe Freeland gets to the Eagles at 23, they're absolutely going to take him. They love big athletic tackles, and that's exactly what he is. So the biggest question here is whether or not he actually falls all the way to 23. Right. I actually wouldn't be surprised to see the Eagles move up to try to get him. So I love this pick right here. I don't really think there's much more to say about it. And then you've got Blake Miller going 24 to the Browns. Remember, you had them taking Carnell Tate earlier in the first round. So, I think they'd be thrilled with Blake Miller falling all the way to 24. That's a good pick there too. So then you've got Zion Young to the Bears. Makes plenty of sense. You think the Bears are sitting there looking at the Eagles and Browns though, thinking, let's try to jump and maybe if the Chargers want Akeem Messidor or TJ Parker, maybe we hop over the Browns and Eagles and take one of those offensive tackles.
Yeah, I mean the Bears, The Bears have picks 57 and 60. So I think that if they're going to use one of those to move up, it's going to be because somebody else slid and they really want to go get a big impact player. From 25, that gets you, a second round pick, you're going to probably want to move into the late teens, the 16, 17, 18 range. I would probably do it. So that would be a spot to look for there if there's someone they're going to move up for, one of those edge rushers, if there's a run on them.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have Zion Young going here. That's fine. Again, Parker's still there. That's going to be an offensive tackler and edge rusher, I would imagine. On this board, Caleb Lomu is the only tackle left, I believe, right? That's so then the Bills take TJ Parker here. That's a great pick. The Bills also, Brandon Beane has invested a lot of high picks on edge rushers. It's something he's historically done. He's missed on a couple of them, like AJ Epinesa. A lot of people thought he was going to be first round pick, fell to the second. He's been a little bit underwhelming. He hasn't been bad, but he's been a little bit underwhelming. So I think his rookie deal's over now, right? I believe he's gone. And
yeah.
TJ Parker would be a big upgrade. And then, of course, Joey Bosa was at the end of his career. So that's a good pick. Jordan Tyson to the 49ers. I mean, my goodness. First of all, they draft wide receivers and tight ends with every other pick. It doesn't matter what they could use one now, but even when they don't need one, they draft wide receivers and tight ends. So that'd be a slam dunk. Lomu to the Texans. I'd have to imagine Texans fans would be thrilled. Okay. Blake Fisher has been, he was pretty good in that playoff game against the Chargers, but I don't know if he was pretty underwhelming before that. Okay. So I think if they could get someone like Caleb Lomu this late, they'd be very happy with that. And then
they brought in Braden Smith, and they really could use an interior offensive lineman. But Lomo could, I think he could shift to interior if he wants, or they could kick Braden Smith back inside.
Yeah, Braden Smith's he's another one. He's got short arms as well. The former Indianapolis Colt. All right, and then you got Peter Woods. You got Denzel Boston going in the first round to the Dolphins. So. And Iheanacho was still there. That was not, so Lomu was not the last tackle on the board. I don't think Iheanacho gets to 31.
Probably not. But I agree, probably not. But I do think that he's a little more raw than some of the other guys. He's played right tackle. I just think that he's a project. You're not going. He shouldn't see the field this year. And then if you're talking about an offensive lineman not seeing the field, for me, he's clearly the last of this group. But again, when we're going to get to this point when there's Lomo Miller, whoever Iheanacho is left, you're going to see teams going, all right, I got to jump up and pay the price to get him. Otherwise, I'm not going to get a tackle in this draft that's got a chance to be good.
Yeah, well, that's really the big deal there. You're not going to, like, the Patriots have to take Iheanacho there, or you're looking at, taking Jude Bowery and late day 2 or day 3. Colton Hood, I think you can pencil him in somewhere in the first round. I like that pick a lot.
I do think that's a little low for him, but again, it's when you're talking about a lot of these guys going low, someone's got to slip.
Yeah, I think here the Dolphins taking Denzel Boston might be a slight reach.
Don't even go there. Denzel Boston might be the best receiver in this draft. This guy is not getting enough credit.
I like Denzel Boston.
You better learn to love him because he is. I think he's, again, we were talking about underrated players last week. The only reason I didn't bring him up as underrated is because I have him as a first round pick, and some people don't want him in the first round, and I think that's a little crazy. But what do I know?
I know. 40-yard dashes aren't the end of the world for wide receivers. And now you see all these guys who go to the college football playoffs, they just blow off all their workouts. They're like, yeah, I played a college football game a month and a half ago, so I don't need to test. But Denzel Boston didn't go to the college football playoffs. Does it concern you at all? I mean, he had some good agility numbers, but it doesn't concern you that he didn't run a 40 at all?
No. He ran, you know why? You know why? I'm going to answer that question for you right now. And I'm going to answer it for you very quick and simply. He is 6'4". He has got good, very good length. And he ran at his pro day a 6.80 second 3-cone. That tells me that he's an incredibly quick athlete at that size. At 6'4" is crazy to me, because I think, you know, a lot of receivers don't run 3-cone drills only because, you know, it's not their bread and butter. It's not necessarily the thing they need to be doing. That, you know, we want to see what edge rushers are doing and their bend and all that with getting around the corner. But this is a guy that can do damage all over the field. And again, if he runs, how many times have we seen a receiver run in the 4.6s and been an all-pro, you know, or, you know, the greatest receiver of all time? What was Jerry Rice's 40 time? 4.71 or whatever it was. Like, you know,
I think scouts used to like write a number down on a piece of paper back then instead of, or they would use a sundial.
Yeah, but again, like even since then, though, we've seen a lot of wide receivers run 4.5s, 4.6s that have been incredibly productive, and we've seen a lot of guys run 4.2s that have done absolutely nothing in the NFL. So, like, again, I think that I'm a big Denzel Boston fan. You know, if he goes, you know, he could he go to the second round? Absolutely. But I think that he's going to be one of those picks that we look back at like a DK Metcalf and like, how did that guy go in the second round? How did these teams pass on Denzel Boston and let him fall to the middle of the second round? Which is why I'm going to, you know, I want to see him go in the first round, because, again, all of a sudden he becomes the Dolphins' number one target.
I think that's fair. And I brought up the agility numbers too. I wonder what his 40 time would have been. I mean, if he wasn't willing to run it, but you're right. You've got Keenan Allen, you've got Jarvis Landry, you know, Jerry Rice reportedly been like,
you know what? I haven't really thought about it, but Keenan Allen might be an ideal comp for Denzel Boston. It's similar size and stature, similar type receiver. Keenan Allen went in the second round.
If you got Keenan Allen at pick 30, you'd be pretty happy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, when I said I thought it was a little bit of a reach, I didn't mean like 10 picks too early. I just nitpicking a little bit right there. I like him a little bit better, you know, 35, 36.
Well, that's where did Jaden Higgins go last year?
Right around in that range, 35, 36.
They're very similar style players.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I would not take Peter Woods at 29.
No, you know, but so you see, this is where I'll call you out and being a freaking hypocrite. You love TJ Parker, but what's wrong with Peter Woods then?
TJ Parker is an edge rusher. Peter Woods is an interior lineman. I mean, I have big questions about what his sack potential is going to be, or just forget about sacks, his pass rushing ability. You know, I just think if you're taking a lineman or an interior lineman, defensive lineman in the first round, I want like 7 sacks a year.
Oh, geez, you're you know, this you know what, you're too much this new age NFL crap. You got to stop the run, buddy. All right, here's the truth of the matter is that, you know, the Chiefs tend to do off-brand stuff with their picks. Sometimes it's stuff that doesn't make sense, which is why I gave them Peter Woods, because they do need someone next to Chris Jones, but you know I just don't see them picking somebody that we all think they should pick. I think they're gonna be smarter than everybody else and do something a little bit off brand. So that was not necessarily a player pick, but a team thinking we're smarter than everybody else. So we're going to take Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that type of move.
Well, the Chiefs reach on character issues too. We've seen it a lot. We saw it last year with Omar and Norman Lott, right? Even in the first round, right? Josh Simmons had some not big things, but some character stuff attached to him along with the injury, and they drafted him. And we see it time and time. Rashee Rice. Hey, a lot of people don't realize it, but Rashee Rice, we didn't put him in our top 100. And it wasn't because we didn't think he was one of the top 100 players. We heard he was going to fall because of character flag. Nope.
And again, you look at what he hasn't been able to stay in the field, whether it's injuries or getting in trouble. So that's, it doesn't matter how much talent you wise, the best ability is always availability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, we got to give him a break. Rashee Rice has been productive when he's played, and he was a day two pick. What's that?
But he hasn't played that much.
No, yeah, I know. Well, I'm making the point though that the Chiefs are certainly a team that if you're looking at character issues, they would be the team to prevent some of these guys from sliding down the board.
12 games in the last 2 years. 12 out of, and so, again, the character concern piece, the Chiefs don't seem to care until it happens when they're in a uniform. So they're a bunch of hypocrites too.
All right. With that, let's move on to the second round. So you did not write explanations for the second round. One thing, guys, listen, if you're listening to this, one thing that we can both tell you with certainty, okay, with our 20-ish years of having NFL Rough Draft, nobody reads the comments on the picks. We used to do 7-round mock drafts. I remember writing comments for the 7th round picks. I'm not even kidding. I'd be like, well, Eric Decker's a free agent in 2 years, and Chris Hansen's here in the 4th or 5th round or wherever I had him going. I think his name was Chris Hansen, that receiver from Cal. His last name was definitely Hansen. Doesn't matter what his first name is right now. So, he comes in, plays special teams, and 2 years from now, when Decker leaves as a free agent, he might be able to replace him as a starter. Or, this player is going to provide core special teams ability. Don't write comments. You could do it for the first round, whatever. Some people might read that. No one's going to read it after the first round. So let's take a look here. Ray, Chris Johnson going first in the second round. I love that. I actually think he's going to be a first round pick.
I do too. He should go. He should definitely go before Peter Woods.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about the cornerback class because we've both done hundreds of hours of work on this draft class, and I was doing a little bit more work on the cornerbacks earlier today. I feel like we might be a little bit lower than we should be on some of these guys who are projected to go at the end of the 3rd round right now. I think some of them might pop up to the 2nd round. And I'm talking about like Malik Muhammad, the cornerback from Texas. Hey, Keith Abney from Arizona State. And I could see them actually being 2nd round picks. And I could see one of them even going ahead of Brandon Cisse. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, the one guy that's kind of a huge question mark for that group right now is Avion Terrell. I mean, after his really bad 40, that definitely probably pushed him down. But he's going to be, a nickelback. He forces fumbles. He creates turnovers. I could see a team wanting to pick him in the first 10 picks of the 2nd round. I could also see teams being scared off by his lack of speed because we've seen how much that's hurt defensive backs in the past. But, that's a guy that is going to be in that range right now where we thought maybe he was a 1st round pick 4 or 5 months ago. And then his speed, has been a big question mark. But I do agree with you. I think there's some interesting, day 2, day 3 cornerbacks that could definitely, Dalen Everett is another guy that I like. I don't think he goes in the second round, but I wouldn't be shocked if he went at the end of the second round either. I think that, there's some interesting traits. And again, to your point before about like not a lot of cornerbacks going early in the past is like we have seen teams load up in the second and third round. Because again, at worst case scenario, you're thinking this guy could be a gunner. He's going to play four phases of special teams, whatever it might be. So definitely going to be an interesting group to watch.
Yeah. So, and you brought up the 40 time. We talked about Denzel Boston, and we talked about how the 40 time isn't the end of the world for wide receivers. For cornerbacks, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I'm telling you, we follow this stuff very closely every year. We're putting in hundreds of hours on these draft classes every year, and I have a good memory. You get these prospects who are viewed at cornerback, who are viewed as being, first or second round prospects, and when they don't run fast, they fall. Remember Tease Tabor?
Yeah.
People thought Tease Tabor was going like 15th overall.
Yeah.
He fell, I want to say, to the very end of day 2, or maybe even the 4th. I think it was the very end of day 2, if I remember correctly. But they fall. And I see that with Avion Terrell. And that's kind of, you brought up Everett. He was the other one who I was trying to think of off the top of my head. So here's where I'm going with this. The first round, of course, you've got Delane. Of course, you've got McCoy. Okay. Colton Hood's going to be a first round pick. You and I both think Chris Johnson's going to be a first round pick. And if he's not, it's going to be a situation like you have here where he's one of the first few picks of the second round, right? Like, I don't see him getting past the Raiders. After that, what I'm trying to say is everybody's got Brandon Cissé and Avion Terrell. And I'm not convinced that that's going to happen. We've got Cissé as our next cornerback, but what's keeping Dalen Everett, Malik Muhammad, and Keith Abney from going ahead of them, or from going ahead of him? And obviously, we talked about why Terrell would fall. But what's preventing those three, and then Davison Igbinosun as well, from going ahead of Brandon Cissé?
Yeah, I do say, the other thing that's interesting, because it's definitely possible, but the other thing that's interesting is just the change in what we've seen of how teams use nickelbacks, and each team uses nickelbacks in a different way and the type of players. Some teams are looking to convert a safety to a nickelback. Some teams want the small corner. Some teams want to use bigger corners and try to take care of it that way. But like, that factors in when you look at a guy like, and the reason I say that is because Trayden Stukes is probably not a traditional safety and going to fit in that role. So that might bump out, a guy like Cissé, who a team says we'd rather have Stukes, who's a playmaker, rather than the cornerback. It's always interesting because, again, then you've got a guy like Pons who's small, and if D'Angelo Pons was 3 inches taller, he'd be a lock for a first round pick, but he's not. So that pushes him to the second round. And then if he fits a specific role on a specific team, there's no reason to think that there is a possibility that one of the other cornerbacks, like you mentioned, jumps from the second to the third round. Like, even the Davison, I'm not going to pronounce his last name correctly. From Ohio State. Yeah. So again, you're talking about a longer cornerback, 6'2", good speed, like he could play on the outside. He's got a higher ceiling potentially for what specific teams are looking for. But I do like a lot of these cornerbacks.
And Halsey HFW says he'd be a first round lock if he were D'Angelo Lakes. Yeah, you're right. If he were a little bit bigger, that's a nice play on words right there. And it's not just the height, right? It's the arm length too. Okay. D'Angelo Pons has arms that are shorter than 29.5 inches. That's a big deal for cornerbacks. You brought up Igbinosun, now a completely different type of cornerback. but his arms are almost 33 inches, 32 and 88 inches. Okay, so I again, there are different types of players, but I just think some of these guys who are viewed in the media right now as being late thirds or fourth round picks might go a little bit higher. And some of these other guys who are kind of viewed as being second round picks might go a little bit lower. Now, you and I talked about D'Angelo Ponds. You know, during the college football playoffs, we made a pact. We said, hey, no matter what anybody says about D'Angelo Ponds, he is going to be in our top 100. I don't care how short his arms end up being. I don't care how small he is. I don't care that he's playing boundary cornerback in college. He's got to be in our top 100. And we agreed on that. And now everybody's got him, though, like in the top 50. And that's different to me. Like, that's different than, okay, I'm going to take this guy in the third round, and maybe he ends up being my nickel back, you know, if he can't play outside. I don't know. I like Igbinosun. Nobody's got Igbinosun outside of the top 100. So whatever.
How about Will Lee? Will Lee's has got, you know, not the fastest cornerback, but he's, you know, 6'2", got long arms. He could be a top 100 pick.
He could. And the other workout numbers are good, right? He had a 42-inch vertical, 11 broad. He ran a 4.54. So
Jacario Davis
that's right on that borderline.
Jacario Davis has almost 34-inch arms, 6 foot, just a shade under 6'4". I don't like cornerbacks that are usually that tall, but like, you know, he's at that cusp. If he was much taller, it would be trouble.
See, that's where I think too many people who are like fans and follow the draft, they play too much Madden, because you think of like a creative player. Okay, cool. I'm going to create this cornerback who's 7 feet tall. It's not always the bigger, the better, right? Like when you're looking at cornerbacks, historically, the league does not like cornerbacks that are taller than 6'3", because they change directions like a freaking cruise ship. All right. So that's where Jacario Davis, I like the length and all that. His speed's fine, but I'm worried that he might actually be a little bit too tall, and that might push him to the fourth round. Lee, again, that's going to be right on that borderline in terms of the speed threshold. But yeah, and then Devin Moore is another one. Like, I just don't know what to think of him. He's always hurt. He's come back from groin surgery. Groin surgery is not something you just kind of shake off and go back to being 100% anytime within like the next year. So I don't do teams look at him and say, hey, maybe he'll get back to where he was, or did they look at him and say, all right, well, he's hurt again. He hurt his groin. The durability is an issue already. And now, like, we don't know, like, is he going to regain his speed?
Yeah. He's a guy who's kind of got it all, but the injury history is a huge concern there, like gigantic concern, right? Like, what are we getting out of him? Like, if he's going to miss a bunch of time, he's not worth an early pick.
Yeah. Real quick, and we'll probably go, I don't know, like another 10, 15 minutes and wrap this thing up. But I got to give a shout out, first of all, to Walt again for letting us do this. Okay. He's the man. Okay. It's awesome that he's letting us have this platform to talk about our draft prep. And then also to all of these people who are commenting, you guys are bringing your A material tonight. So thank you for that. And certainly, like if anybody has any questions or anything like that, throw that in there and we'll get to it. And then also to the Calgary Stampeders for letting Ray use their stadium for this podcast.
Taking suggestions for the next location.
Yeah, exactly. And then Keontae Scott is obviously the other corner in the top 100, who's a lock, who we haven't really talked about. But That's if you want to draft a nickelback in the third round, I don't think you're necessarily going to take D'Angelo Ponds over Keontae Scott, because Keontae Scott played nickel. So I'm not saying it's a slam dunk either way. I'm just saying, like, some of these corners who are in the mainstream media up is locks in the second round, Terrell, Cisse, Ponds, they might go around lower, and some of these other guys might go a little bit higher. Any other comments on the cornerbacks before we move on?
No, I think it's an interesting class. Again, we see a lot of different scenarios with this second tiering of grouping guys, for sure.
Okay, we talked a lot about Ty Simpson the other day. We talked about the Cardinals. Everybody's kind of looking at the Cardinals and calling that the spot. And we kind of talked about the other day. I don't want to rehash it too much, but if that's not the spot, right? If they're looking at it and saying, no, we're going to build this team up around the quarterback and we're going to draft a quarterback in 2027, then he could be in for a fall, maybe even to the third round. You've got him going to the Cardinals here at 34. Howell, we're both a little bit lower on than the consensus just because he's got the short arms. We brought up no tackle with sub 31-inch arms has ever been drafted in the top 100. When Cassius Howell went to his pro day, I think they remeasured and he did have 31-inch arms, but he was below that at the combine. Akis, I think that'd be a great pick right there for the Bengals. I mean, they need some defensive help. They went corner, I think, or they take Caleb Downs in the first round. Downs in the first round. So you got Akis here to help
I just
out.
the guy I wanted to touch on real quick was Caleb Banks, who I like a lot, and I think that if he wasn't hurt most of last year, he would have been easily a first round pick. I think again in my last here's a spoiler, not a prediction. In my next mock, Banks is going higher than Woods. In my final mock.
I like that because I think he's got a higher ceiling than Woods. Even though, Peter Woods, for those of you who don't follow this all year, there were people who thought he might be the first pick in the draft. That's how big of a prospect he was coming into this year. That obviously didn't happen. He had a disappointing year. Caleb Banks was hurt. He's a monster. Okay, he's bigger. He's got 35 plus arms. My only concern with him, it's going to come down to the medical, because he's got this foot injury, right? He hurt his foot again at the combine. You mentioned he hasn't really played. He showed up to the Senior Bowl, but he hasn't really played. It's going to come down to whether or not teams actually think he's going to be able to stay healthy, because that is a pretty big concern. That's not like having like a broken collarbone or something like that that's going to heal and you never have to worry about it again. So yeah, I like Caleb Banks a lot. And it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes. It's good. I think medical teams and
it's really just medical with him. Otherwise, he probably would be a first round pick.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got the second tier of interior offensive linemen here, right? Basantis, Pregnon, or
Rutledge.
Rutledge. You could also throw Jennings Dunker in there, right? Some people think he could play tackle. He didn't look very good at tackle at the Senior Bowl, but someone might try him at tackle first and then move him inside if it doesn't work out. Do you think any of those four could be in play for the Chargers instead of Messidor in the first round?
I don't think in the first round. I could see Pregnon's probably the best of that group, but he's an older prospect and he's a guard. I think these guys could all go in the first few picks in the second round. Could someone sneak into the bottom of the first round? I guess, but you're talking about a guard. Again, we talk about taking a tackle and being like, he didn't work out as a tackle. Let's try him inside at guard. If a guard doesn't work out, you're not kicking him outside to tackle.
No.
Again, the best example was, I loved Robert Gallery when the Raiders drafted him and thought he was going to be great. He didn't work out as a tackle, kicked inside the guard, and was great. When we've seen guards fail before, that one of the Chance Warmack's a good example, a guy who's taken, I think he went 9th overall, would sound about right. He wasn't worth taking 9th overall because you need to be an all-pro if you're going to take a guard 9th overall. If you're going to take a guard and an interior offensive lineman in the first round, he better be all rookie team that first year. I think 3 went last year, starting with Booker, Zabel, and I'm forgetting somebody. Who am I forgetting that went in the first round last year? Graham Barton was the year before. Or was Graham Barton last year? Now I'm getting all my years mixed up. Anyways, there was some, and those guys were all head and shoulders above this second tier. Now Vega is better than all of them. Vega is better than Tyler Booker. So Vega is going to be a special player. He could be the first offensive lineman off the board, but that's my opinion. But
yeah, Halsey HFW says Will Campbell, which he's right. Will Campbell is
a great point. Will Campbell, guard. Again, that's a good example. We saw how Will Campbell got abused in basically all season long, but that's the arm thing. So that the Patriots won't do it now, but they should kick him inside the guard, and he'll probably be a Pro Bowler.
That'll probably eventually end up happening. And you're right, it didn't haunt the Raiders at all. They kicked Robert Gallery inside the guard and didn't draft Larry Fitzgerald or Eli Manning or not Eli Manning or Phillip Rivers or Ben Roethlisberger. That didn't impact their franchise at all.
Donovan Jackson was the other guard that went last year.
Yeah, well, and then don't forget, remember you and I met Jonathan Cooper at the Walter.
Yeah, that's the other one I was thinking of. He was a bigger bust than Chance Warmack.
Yeah, he was a top 10 pick, guard only, and like you said, he went bust, and there's nowhere where you're going if you bust as a guard in the top 10 overall picks.
And you bring up the Walter Payton Foundation,
Walter Camp
Foundation, which is obviously a very big award ceremony. Back in 2013, we were there, and one of the we're mingling. We saw some players. We've met Johnny Manziel one year, but in 2013, we were standing next to a guy who was neither of us are that tall. Mike's about 5 foot. What are you, 5'5"?
5'5"? I'm not 5 foot. I'm 5'9", and look, I could even pass for 5'10" when I've got that's why I spike up the front of my hair. Okay, Ray?
So
get out of here.
There's a guy standing next to us, and I swear he was 3 or 4 inches shorter than Mike. And it ended up being Tavon Austin. So we were like, how's this guy's gonna struggle in the NFL if he's shorter than Mike. But he had a solid NFL career, but not for the 8th overall pick, but he played a good amount of time in the NFL, but also he was a really nice guy too. So
yeah, I think I was talking to somebody else, and I came back over to see what you're doing. I'm like, who is this kid that you're talking to? Because he was like, he really was like 5'5", not really 5'5".
He was pretty short.
He was a little bit shorter than me, but yeah. He was also like 100 pounds lighter than me. Anyway, so yeah, Joshua Josephs, you have him going in the second round here. Thank you. I mentioned him as someone who I'm higher on than I think the consensus on our show the other night. He's got longer arms, speed rusher. And there are a couple clips that I kind of mentioned the other day where if you watch him play against Arkansas, now the tackle that he beat from Arkansas isn't that good, but on each of these 2 plays, Arkansas rolls Taylen Green out away from Josephs. And on both of those reps, Josephs gets there. One of them, I swear, it looked like a strip sack, but I guess they called it an incomplete pass. And then the other one, he forced Taylen Green to throw the ball away. So he's someone who I think could go in this range. You have him at 58. I think a lot of people would be surprised to see his name or hear his name in the second round. But I wouldn't be. And then you've got Keontae Scott there. We talked about him. And then to close out the second round, I'm having trouble with Trotter and Claire. And while we're on it,
take a pen, write him into the Rams. Trotter's going to be a Ram, and the Rams always reach on day 2. Sometimes they hit, sometimes they miss. Trotter to the Rams. Write it down.
Is he a 3-down linebacker?
I'm not saying he is. I mean, is anybody these days?
Yes, absolutely.
No, but it's the tough thing is that you're talking about only because you're forced to. There's a handful of guys in the NFL, a handful that are legit 3-down linebackers. You got guys that are really good against coverage and they're dog shit against the run. And then you're talking about a handful of guys that are good at both. You could count them on one hand. And so you got to take the good with the bad. I don't love Trotter, but I don't think he's, I think he's a Ram. I think that's where he's going. Write it down.
That's scary in the second round. I remember people had, and this isn't really a direct correlation, but his brother, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., a lot of people had him going, pretty high as well in mock drafts back then. That, obviously, the fact that they're brothers doesn't really matter, but they're both linebackers that weren't really very good in coverage, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. ended up going a lot later than a lot of people expected.
But you look at a guy like I'll use Robert Spillane. Robert Spillane's an example. Robert Spillane played a lot for the Raiders and played a lot for the Patriots. He is terrible in coverage. He is horrible in coverage. He probably couldn't cover a garbage can. So but he plays and he's on the field all the time, but he's so good against the run and he's so stout that he has to be on the field.
And where did he get drafted?
Huh?
Where did he get drafted?
Well, he was an undrafted player, but that's so you're just not going to ever draft a linebacker? That's the problem, is that you've been subjected to such bad defenses for your favorite NFL team that you don't know what a good linebacking play is anymore.
But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with positional value. Okay, off the ball linebackers don't have a lot of value. Look at this range. Okay, now our Mason Thomas, you probably have to be a 3-4 base to draft him because he's kind of small.
But here's
an edge rusher.
Here's what I'll tell you, and this is the thing. Like I just mentioned, there's a handful of these guys in the league that are elite linebackers. If you get one of them, right, like you're set, and you can't no one gives up these elite guys. You look at a guy like Fred Warner. Fred Warner is, I'd say it's
great against the pass, great in coverage.
But I would say he's pretty much a lock. I think he's probably a Hall of Famer, right? He's a 3rd round pick. That wasn't that big in coming out. And he fits the mold. Like there's not a lot of guys that that are great in. And again, I think linebacker is a position that needs to develop, needs to be coached up and developed. And if you got a guy who's got the skill set to do it, you need to take the shot. Now, I don't.
Think it's a different mold though. That's a different mold than Trotter.
Who? Well, I'm not calling him Fred Warner. That's extreme. Fred Warner's, again, a Hall of Famer. I'm just saying, you could look day 2. We see this all the time with tight ends. I say it all the time. Some of the highest drafted tight ends, Kyle Pitts, oh my God, I almost said Vontae Davis. Vernon Davis. Thank you. These guys who are super freak athletics, Evan Engram, even Evan Engram didn't go as high, but these super freak athletic tight ends that people think they're going to change the game. And can you sneak my fall on this? And yet you look at the best tight ends ever, and a handful of them were first round picks. They're mostly not first round picks. And, Brock Bowers fit the mold of a more traditional tight end because he didn't run like a 4.40 and weigh 219 pounds, but he was still, he went 12th when he probably should have, went 4th or 5th. But like, same thing goes for linebackers and safeties. A lot of times, like, we're looking back and like, man, how'd that guy fall? Like Troy Polamalu was the 16th pick. I forgot where Ed Reed went. But these guys were great in college. They just were missing like one trait. Like Kyle Hamilton, he's an all-pro. He went, I don't remember what did he go? I keep thinking he went 14th because that's where they're picking this year, but it wasn't 14th.
He was late though. He was supposed to be like, supposed to be top 10.
I thought he went. Yeah, I mean, we thought he was going to be a top 10 pick for sure. He did go 14th overall. That's what we did go. And again, I think sometimes we see these, to your point, these positions slip because there's not a lot of, teams don't want to spend a premium on a tight end, a safety, a guard, and then all of a sudden, you're like, and this draft is a good example of what you have to be careful about because there's not a lot of deep talent. So like, could you see a team saying, I am going to take Emmanuel Pregnant because I know that he's going to be a good starter. There's no doubt in my mind, very least good starter. Maybe he develops into an all-pro. Going back to the other side, you could see teams taking a shot on somebody else. It's like a Kyle Lewis, who is 225 pounds, but is probably better in coverage. And, it's just an interesting position to evaluate linebacker because every team looks for something different. Every single team, for the most part, wants a different type of player at linebacker. Some use 3 linebackers, some use 4, some use 2, some use 1. Some would rather just play in. I mean, you're in nickel most of the time anyways. So at most, you're usually having 1 or 2 linebackers that are in coverage on the field at a time. I'm not counting your edge rushers if you're a traditional like 3-4 team, right? You need 2 linebackers, and you need 2 guys who can cover basically sideline to sideline, but also stop the run because you got to stop the run when you're in nickel too.
Yeah, and the run game is a little bit more in vogue than it was a few years ago. You're seeing a lot more 2 tight end base offenses. But I don't know. I'm just not. I'm not sold on Trotter in the second round. I'm not even completely sold on him in the top 100. I just think, again, I get what you're saying. I just think it's a position where you could find guys. You look around the league, and it's littered with starters who are day 3 picks, or you mentioned Spillane was an undrafted free agent. You can find athletic guys who come in, help out on special teams early on their rookie contracts, and then develop into a little bit more. I see Trotter going in this range though. So I guess I'm the one who's kind of going against the grain on this one. But whatever. I guess we've talked enough about him. Do you want to talk quickly about the 3rd round?
Yeah. I mean, it's fine with me.
All right. So 3rd round, you got. I think the 3rd round's a really nice spot for Branch. This is kind of something that you noticed even before me. You used to say this to me all the time back in the day. Like, I'm talking about going back like 25, 30, probably like close to 30 years, but like 25 years ago, I remember listening to you say, Mike, these small receivers get hit and they're never the same. Now, it was a different game, right? When we were growing up, when we were teenagers, and even when we were in college, it was a different game. There are a lot more safety rules put in place to kind of help these small receivers, but it's still the same issue. Okay. Look at Tank Dell. Tank Dell was taking the league by storm. Now, is he ever going to be anything other than a shell of what he was? Well, I don't know. Look at Hunter Renfrow. Hey, Hunter Renfrow I believe he had like 90 receptions one year. He got hit against the Jets, had all kinds of like internal injuries, tried to come back. He had that infamous hit against the Cardinals where he fumbled in overtime, had a concussion, and Cardinals picked it up and returned it for a touchdown to win the game. He was never the same. These smaller receivers just don't hold up. They never have. And even with the new rules, they still have a hard time staying healthy. Zachariah Branch is really small, which is why I think in the third round, I feel a little bit more comfortable with him than I would, in the top 50 picks where I see a lot of people having him come off the board.
Yeah. Just hitting on the wide receivers, the two that come to my mind that I was screaming about at the time were KJ Hamler and Tutu Atwell.
Yep.
Both smaller stature receivers and both have dealt with a lot of injury history. Zachariah Branch is a skosh bigger than them, but just by a hair. And again, the thing is the one thing they get away with in college is A, not everyone's a good tackler, and B, not everyone is fast. In the NFL, everybody's fast. Everybody's fast. So the guy that these receivers were eluding is now that 230-pound linebacker we just talked about is now laying them out. Yeah, you're right. The comment, Hollywood Brown is like the outlier, right? Like he's not a big guy and is very much, still a productive receiver, but he is by far one of the outliers of that group, right? Deshaun Jackson was an outlier too.
But Hollywood in recent years has been small. Well, he's still obviously small, but he's been injured and broken down.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Over a 17-game season, if you're going to the playoffs, they're going to get dinged up and miss time. The other one, who's getting a lot of love because he ran a 4.26 40 is Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State, but he's another guy. He's 164 pounds. That's not a lot of meat on your bones. And again, he is fast, but he's not fast enough where he's going to be running away from everyone. You got to have a little more meat on your bones there. But Zachariah Branch has a chance to be a good receiver, but would never take anything away from those guys. But you got to be cautious when you're drafting guys like that. And like we talked about it, the quarterback position, quarterbacks that weigh around 200 pounds or less, they get beat up. Same thing with the receivers that are weighing between, that 160 to 170 range. They get beat up.
We used to not even consider putting a wide receiver in our top 100 if they weighed 170 pounds or less. I remember, right, if we went back 4 or 5 years, we would see some of these guys like Atwell and Tank Dell, and we missed on them. We had them outside of our top 100 because we're like, wait a minute, you don't have wide receivers that are this big being as productive NFL players. Like the media must be overrating them. And then Tutu Atwell went in the second round, which is a terrible pick. And then Tank Dell went in the third round, which, on the surface looked like an absolutely fantastic pick. But look what happened. You got a year out of him. And I mean, I hope the best for him. We have him on a lot of our dynasty teams and in fantasy football. But I mean, it's going to kind of be a little bit of an uphill climb for him to ever get back to being a relevant wide receiver.
And that's the thing that these guys, the guys that are the 160-pound receiver are relying on their speed. And when they have a knee injury to the extent that like Tank Dell did, there's almost no chance you're getting back to that speed. So do you have enough traits to make up for it in the long run? I don't know. I'll say, yeah, Tyreek Hill is built like that guy is for a small guy. He's got a thick neck. Cheetah does.
Yeah. And he's a little bit bigger than he's not 165 pounds. All right. So, when I look at this as, one of the stories of the third round, I think, maybe not for everybody, but certainly for us, is going to be, where do these centers start coming off the board, and which of these centers start coming off the board, right? You've got Jake Slaughter, you've got Connor Liu, right? You've got the Iowa center, and then you've got Sam Heck. Yeah, Logan Jones, right? And you've got Sam Heck. And I even like Trey Zune. I think someone could consider Trey Zune just because he's a little bit bigger than a couple of those guys, and he's got a little bit more position versatility, where I think you could draft him and say, all right, well, maybe he's going to be a starting guard to start off until we're comfortable with him calling the blocking assignments at center. Or maybe he'll just be a backup interior offensive lineman at all three of those positions. And you've seen guys like that go late on day two.
Yeah, you can even throw Brian Parker into that mix too. Like those guys are interesting, especially in a draft like this, where it's like, Trey Zune and Brian Parker, wherever they get drafted, have a good chance to be, game day active players because they can fill in a pinch in any five positions. Now, the tough part is, in my opinion, the two best centers in this draft are Connor Liu and Logan Jones. Connor Liu's coming off the injury, which is going to hurt his stock. Logan Jones has a little bit of, stubby arms, all right?
And he's 25, right? Isn't he 25 years old as well?
Yeah. I do think, I don't want to give credit to anyone else, but there's a couple of teams. It feels like there's some teams that are looking for centers, starting centers, that are they're gonna take them on day two. The Ravens lost Tyler Lindenbaum. Are they going to take one of those guys? We've already talked about teams like the Texans. Jake Andrews is center, but could there be some potential upgrade there? There's some teams that are looking for centers, and these guys are clumped together.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see how that works out. And, I guess when we start talking about who the top center is, I guess that's and the value of having an interior offensive lineman reserve who would be active on game days because he can back up all three positions. I guess that's about the time where we should start to wrap this up. But do you want to look at the fourth round super quick here and just see if there's any highlights here? Anybody that might surprise the people who are tuning in here?
Yeah, one guy that we talked about yesterday is Jay-Sean Barham. He's a guy who transitioned from off the ball to an edge rusher last year. Doesn't have a lot of starts. I think he's a guy who could go at the end of round 3, beginning of round 4. Just because the edge rushers aren't as strong, and then you got the running back class. Like this is you take Jeremiah Love out of it, it's probably the worst running back class we've seen in the last 30 years. With Jeremiah Love, he saves them. There's some guys who I think are going to be really nice backups, but that is probably what a lot of their future is. We had Jadarian Price and Mike Washington at the end of round 2. But, the rest of these running backs have gaping holes in their game. Could someone go at the end of round 3? Certainly. But, I think round 4 is more realistic for a lot of these guys. And then the other grouping that I just want to hit on real quick was tight ends. Like, you brought up you didn't really love Max Clare. I agree that he's got some issues, that don't make him an ideal prospect. You've got certain guys who are, like Will from Ohio State, there was Max Clare and Will Cameron. I can't say his name either. He's
Derek, right?
Yeah. Like he's a blocker. He's a straight up blocking tight end, and then Sam Roush is a really good blocking tight end, but he's got short arms. That's going to play a significant impact in the NFL. You get away with it in college, but it's going to be a problem in the NFL. So those two positions are going to be kind of bunched together. I think that, between 90 and 120, you're going to see a bunch of them go, but they could be, 4 tight ends go between 110 and 120.
Okay, let me ask you this. So obviously Sadiq's tight end 1, Stowers is tight end 2. Tight end 3. Jolie or Claire?
For me, it's Jolie, who was also who was recruited by Sacred Heart University actually at one point.
He went to
But
UConn, right?
yeah, and then
He
he,
started his career at UConn.
yeah, and then he transferred to NC State. But he, he is that, he's in that Evan Engram type mold, but you're getting him in the late, like the third round. That's a lot better. Guy, I do like him in that range more. I like him more than Delp, who I think is going to get overdrafted. Who's your next tight end?
It's tough because I see Max Claire's been getting from what I understand, Max Claire teams are not happy that Max Claire decided not to work out. But we're seeing this from a lot of players who played in the college football playoffs the last couple of years. So it's not entirely unique. So I mean, my gut still tells me Max Claire goes in the third round. I don't think he'll be a second round pick anymore. But I think when you're looking at top 100 locks, I think after the top two, Jolie and Max Claire are the only locks. I'm having a really hard time with Oscar Delp here. I know he had a really good pro day. I know, you've got him in the second round here. Jordan Reed from ESPN talked about how the Panthers are showing a lot of interest in him. I'm struggling with him. I don't know that he goes in the top 100 picks. So for me, I think Jolie's definitely in the top 100. The top two, Sadiq and Stowers, definitely in the top 100. And if we had to submit our board tonight, I think I would try really hard to talk you into Max Claire being in. Delp is truly on the borderline. He's right on the cusp.
Me. I mean, Claire's in for me. Delp, I think, is going to get overdrafted. I think he's got a little bit better size, even though his arms measured kind of shorter. I think that was a surprise to some people. But again, I think this is what, we used to always, back in the day, we took more, we evaluated tight ends a little bit differently in terms of, we always knew there was going to be some teams that prioritized blocking and would reach on a tight end, in the third round that had maybe 100 career yards.
Richard Quinn.
Yeah.
Right? From the Broncos. From North Carolina, I think.
Yeah, and that was a pick they had, traded with the Steelers for, actually. He, that was one of those situations where we looked at guys a little bit differently to say, where do they fit in, because we don't see it as much. But then now there's been that shift back where it's like, I just need a tight end to be able to get in somebody's way. We'll coach him up. We don't care if he's a good blocker or not. And we've seen, Travis Kelce was not a good blocker when he first came in the league. Absolutely not. Antonio Gates still couldn't block. Tony Gonzalez wasn't a great blocker either. What matters more, the ability to stretch the field, stretch the seam, or be a sixth lineman. So now that's what you're seeing. How many teams are using, an extra lineman in those situations and not caring that their tight ends can't block? They're just replacing them on the field and playing with six linemen. So I think that's, for us has been that shift of prioritizing a lot of these receiving tight ends that teams think they can, develop as blockers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then I guess for me, the last thing here, this might surprise some people, but you've got Nussmeier, Cole Payton, and Drew Aller all going on day 3. Doesn't surprise me. I've talked a lot over the last couple hours here about, if you have paid attention to what has historically happened in draft classes through the media and then what actually happened over the years, the draft media is littered with Michael Pratt's and Kyle Lauletta's and Jacob Eason's and Jake Fromm's, and even last year, Will Howard, you can name a bunch of guys, Tyler Wilson, Sam Barkley, a bunch of these guys who the media thinks are going to end up being day 2 quarterbacks, and they all fall to day 3. Nussmeier, I think, of this group would be my pick to sneak into day 2, but it would surprise me. You've got Taylor Green in, okay, good. He's got some traits. We talked about that in the last show. Nussmeier showed up to the combine and weighed 203 pounds. That's a big red flag. He must have known, hey, I need to be at my maximum weight. I need to be drinking gallons of water before, especially when you're a quarterback. It's not like you have to go out there and like run the 40 if you don't want to. And he still only weighed 203 pounds at the combine, which makes me wonder what his actual playing weight is. And that could push him to day 3. You have him just outside the top 100, right? I think you had him up here at 103. That's a great spot. I love that landing spot for him too. The Jets, where it gives them a shot to hit a home run with their quarterback this year before they draft one in 2027. But more than likely, that's their long-term backup. I really like that pick. But then you've got Allar and you've got Cole Payton down here later in the 4th round. We talked about this a lot last week as well, but I don't see how Cole Payton is a top 100 pick. I think I've tried over and over again to try to understand this rationale and why so many people have him there. The only shred of sense that it would make would be if you had a team that, like, Sean Payton, who made a bunch of weird picks last year in the top 100, decided he wants like a Taysom Hill in his offense, or Mickey Loomis decides to draft another one for the Saints, and they draft Cole Payton as a Taysom Hill type. Still don't think that's worth a top 100 pick, but I think he is clearly a day 3 pick. He should be on the outside looking in. And then we talked about Allar. Somebody on Twitter was Ray, look, we started this when we were very young. Okay, so this is not a knock on younger people, but some of these younger people with Twitter accounts are on here telling me, well, Drew Allar consistently won. What don't you like about it? Drew Allar consistently won what? Did he play for Kent State, or did he play for Penn State? How many times did he beat Ohio State? 0 times. How many times did he beat Oregon? 0 times. Okay, he consistently won against unranked teams. He was 30-0 against unranked teams, which he should have been. Okay, you could say Penn State didn't have the talent that Ohio State and Oregon had. Sure, that's fine. But when you're the quarterback of the team, you've got to steal one of those wins. Against that Ohio State game a few years ago, he couldn't get a first down. The Oregon game this year, he played like garbage for the first 3 quarters. He had a chance still in overtime, right? Home game, throws a pick to end the game. Drew Allar hasn't consistently won anything.
I think with the disappointing thing with Allar, really with any quarterback, when you talk about, when you use you can't, to me, with quarterbacks specifically, you can't use the excuse ever of he didn't have the talent around him that Ohio State did or Michigan did, because a good quarterback makes everyone around him better. Shouldn't need, again, we're talking about NFL starters. You shouldn't prop them up, So again, we've talked about that before, when all of a sudden it's like, this guy's had really good receivers. Is that why he had inflated numbers? And like, you look at Joe Burrow and you're like, he had the 2 best receivers. That's the best wide receiving duo college football history, because it would be the best wide receiver duo in the NFL today. But he put up numbers that were, broke all those records, right? It's different when you look at a guy and you're like, hey, he put up pretty solid numbers, but he had a first and third round receiver who were both, good, whatever. Drew Allar, I don't know who he made better around him, because they had such a strong run game in 24. I think it might have masked some of his deficiencies. And then when the running game wasn't as good in 25, the team fell apart.
And there's still talent around that offense. I know the receivers aren't that good. They've had one of the best tight end rooms for years now.
With Tyler Warner.
I mean, Luke Reynolds was the top recruited tight end in the nation, and they're usually 2 or 3 deep. Obviously, Tyler Warren was there. We talk about, I have heard people say the offensive line wasn't that good. Okay, the offensive line had arguably the best offensive lineman in this draft class, and they had Nolan Rucci, who's going to get drafted, right? They had the other tackle who's going to get drafted. He's probably a 5th round pick. So that's enough talent where you need to be able to pull off, and look, we're not saying he's a day 3 pick only because he didn't win. I'm just telling you one of the arguments that I heard on Twitter. It's just absurd. Okay. He's a day 3 pick because he's not as athletic as people think he is. And even though he's big and he's got a big arm, he's not very accurate with the ball. And like you said, he doesn't make his receivers better.
Yeah. I mean, maybe when we're looking back on it, Tyler Warren did him a lot of favors by catching those passes 3 yards within the line of scrimmage and turning them into 25-yard games,
And even in that year, lost to Ohio State, lost to Oregon, lost to Notre Dame in the college football playoffs. I mean, you beat Boise State. Okay, you're Penn State. You should beat Boise State.
Yeah.
All right. Ray, is there anything you want to say before we go here? We've been going for 2 hours here. Anything else you want to touch on before we sign off?
No, I think that, I think just, watch out for our next, our next convo. And, next week we will wrap up our top 100 board where we secure, everyone where, our final board and our final mocks, and Mike brought it up before. The mock draft is a lot of fun. And I think sometimes where we get caught in that of doing it is, deciding we should be saying what the team is going to do. Sometimes we get caught in what we want the team to do because we think we know better than they do.
Yeah, that definitely happens. But of course, I'm sure Walt and Charlie are going to do a show where they're talking about the mock draft.
Yeah.
Tune in and check them out. Charlie is very good at mock drafting. Don't let Walt, Walt is great at mock drafting too. Okay. We've seen it for years. So Charlie, I know he might be the best. Okay. But Walt is right there with him. Okay. And then we'll be here to talk about our top 100 board. If I could figure out how to share this other screen that I've been trying to share on this platform, I would show you the huddle report where I mentioned earlier. Hey, let me see if I could do this. All right. That might work. And then can I share screen? Oh, I might have figured it out, Ray.
Thank God.
Look at this. It took me 2 hours. All right. So if you listen to Todd McShay and Mensch, which by the way, they know what they're talking about too. They're great. But, Mensch keeps McShay in line a little bit. McShay talks all about, he's got the best board. He guarantees you that nobody's going to have a better board. Well, look, he deserves to be able to say that right now because in 2025, he has the best 5-year average. Okay, he does. And so he deserves to be able to say that. But if you see NFL Rough Draft down here in 2019, we held the 5-year average. 2020, we retained the 5-year average. Both scores higher than this 85.4, by the way. And then what you don't see here is in 2022, okay, in 2022, where it says Bob McGinn, we were actually tied with 86. Okay, so we actually held the 5-year average title 3 years, 2019, 2020, and 2022, and tied with Bob McGinn for 2022. We've won it in 3 different years, okay, 2015, 2018, 2022. So, if you're going to check out any of our shows, it would be the show on our top 100 board. We obsess over it. And
Charlie released a mock draft today. I want you to guess where he had Peter Woods going, since you hate Peter Woods so much.
Did he have him going to the Chiefs?
He had him going 14 to the Ravens.
Okay, interesting.
He has Reuben Bain going to the Chiefs at 9, which makes a lot of sense as well.
It does make a lot of sense. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to hear, some of Charlie's perspectives on where the landing spot is for some
it's a
of
very
these
good
guys.
mock. So his mock is really good. So people should go check that out.
Definitely, and I'll definitely be tuning into
they
that
haven't
show
already.
too. I'll be tuning into that show where Walt and Charlie talk about putting the final touches on that mock. You still there, Ray? The Calgary Stampeders might have shut the lights off on Ray, but we're about to. Oh, you're there! You're back. I thought the Calgary Stampeders.
You keep cutting out. I think it's you. You keep cutting out. I think that's a sign for our time to go.
That's our sign to cut this off. Well, hey, and Walter chimed in to say, "Great show, thank you, Walt. Thanks again for letting us do this, guys. We'll probably be back, either Friday or next week. We'll post it on Twitter. We'll let you know. But thank you for following along. Thanks for all the great questions and comments, and we'll catch you next time."